gender reveals. Let's talk about gender reveals this morning because they become a pretty big deal in our culture today. Maybe for you, you don't know what they are. Let me just quickly just kind of give you a little background. Basically, it's where a couple gets together. It's like, hey, here's the gender of this child we're getting ready to have. And so you find out if it's a boy or a girl. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes these videos pop up of gender reveals that have gone wrong. And they always make me laugh, and maybe they make you laugh too. And so I just thought, I want to share with you some headlines of gender reveals that have gone wrong. So here we go. Australian gender reveal party goes wrong as car bursts into flames. Sounds like Mad Max, doesn't it? Anybody know the connection? Australia connection? Okay. Some of you need to go watch Mad Max after church today. A fight over confetti broke out during a gender reveal party at an Ohio Applebee's. There's a lot going on in just that one headline, isn't there? Florida couple uses huge pet alligator to reveal gender of 10th child. One word, Florida, right? Dad breaks ankle during gender reveal on Father's Day. That dad gave it all that day, didn't he? And the last one, gender reveal, baseball hits grandfather in the face, covering him in blue powder. Like grandpa's reflexes aren't what they used to be, so maybe don't throw it towards grandfather. Hopefully, if you've ever done a gender reveal before, none of these things have happened and you're not a headline. But why do we do these? We do gender reveals because we have this incredible, great news that we want to share with someone else, right? With family, with friends. We'll post it on social media because we want everyone to know this child that we're getting ready to have and the gender of that child. But it's not just gender reveals where we share great news. We share it when we get that first job. We share it when we get that promotion. We share it when we're getting married. We share it when we're buying a home. I mean, there's so many instances in our life where we have this great news and we share it with family and friends and the world around us. We have this incredible news that we want so many other people to know about that we share it in any way that we can. Here's my question for us today. How many of us do the same when it comes to Jesus? Are we excited enough about the connection that we have with Jesus that we want to share that good news with the world? Because if we are a follower of Christ, we are called to share that good news. That is the mission that we are called to be a part of. And so that's why we are in this series called Tag Your It. We started it last week and we began by talking about this mission that we're called to. And so if you weren't here last week, don't worry, I'm going to give you a little recap. If you forgot, you're going to get a recap again here. So let's go back and talk about what we talked about. Matthew 28, verse 19. Jesus says, go and make disciples of all the nations. This is the mission that Jesus gives his followers that day there on that mountaintop, right? He tells his disciples, he's like, look, this is your job. Your job is to go into the world and tell everybody my story, to teach them how I taught you to live, to baptize them, to teach them to obey my teachings. This is who you are called to be. And we said last week, in that moment, Jesus is saying, hey, Tag, you're it. Like you've spent these 3+ years with me, you've hung out with me, you've learned from me, you've followed me, you've watched me die, you've watched me be brought back to life. And now I'm getting ready to go spend a little bit of time with God. I'm going to come back at some point in time, but I'm going to go spend some time with God. And now it's your job to go tell the world my story. And so this is the mission that those disciples were given that day. But it's also the mission that if you are a follower of Jesus, that you and I are given to. Now, last week we talked about that word go there. And I said that a better translation of it is going. So in our going of life, in our going of every day of life, at work, at the ball field, at the gym, wherever we may be, we are called to live this mission out. To help more and more people meet Jesus, love Jesus, and follow Jesus. And so last week, I shared with you our new vision for this church. And it's really not a new vision because we're taking what we see here from Jesus and just saying, hey, let's put it into words for us. And so for us here at The Journey, we are a movement of people, right? This is us going about life every single day. We are this movement of people on mission together. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more this morning. On mission together to help more and more people love and follow Jesus in Northern Virginia. And last week we talked about how we live this out. I said it is so important that if we follow Christ, that we know who our one is. That person in our life that we know is far from Jesus. Who is that person for us? And I said, if you can't identify that person in your life, then maybe the best thing to do is to pray for that. Hey, God, show me my one. Who is that one in my life that you want me to invest my time and spend time with because you want them to encounter Jesus just like I have? Now, if you weren't here last week and you're like, that's kind of weird, where does that come from? It actually comes out of a teaching from Luke chapter 15 from Jesus. It's a story he tells. It says, if a man has 100 sheep and one of them gets lost, what will he do? Won't he leave the 99 others in the wilderness and go to search for the one that is lost until he finds it? If we're followers of Christ, we are the 99 in this story. That we, in our lives, know who Jesus is. We have met Jesus. We're trying to love Jesus every day. We're trying to follow Jesus in our going about life. But at the same time, we are living out the mission of Jesus in our life with people that we have these relationships with. We have this incredible good news to share with others. And so our role, if we're a follower of Christ, we're part of this 99, our role is to share that good news in the world that we live in. But I'm guessing there's probably a little fear there. There's something about us that brings about this fear, that brings about this tension when it comes to sharing that good news. Dave Ferguson wrote a book called Bless. We did a series on it a couple of years ago. And in it, he talks about this inner voice that when it comes to sharing our good news with people that maybe we hear. So maybe this is what your inner voice says too. He writes this, he says, my faith has made a huge difference for me and I know it could help others, right? Part of the 99, you're like, yep, that's true. Jesus tells us it's good news and I should share it. That's what we were just talking about. But whenever I try to present the gospel, I feel like I'm selling a used car or I'm part of a pyramid scheme. Somebody feel like that? Probably feels like that. By the way, if you sell used cars, we love you. You be you, make that money, okay? If we follow Jesus, we should want to share this good news about Jesus and not feel like we're trying to dupe someone or we're trying to pull off some kind of scheme. And yet we feel this tension, don't we? We feel this kind of this discomfort in sharing what we know is good news for us to share. And maybe it's because we see our faith this way. Maybe for many of us, we look at our faith and we're like, hey, my faith is private. But not only is my faith private, their faith is private too. And I really don't want to mix up in that. You know what? It feels really weird to talk to somebody about what their faith may be like. Well, let me share this truth with you today. Our faith is meant to be personal, but it's not meant to be private. Let me read that one more time. Our faith is meant to be personal, but it's not meant to be private. It's personal because you are the only one that can make that decision to have that relationship with Jesus. No one can force you to do that. And oh, by the way, you can't force someone else to take that step in their life too. It is personal in that way, but our faith is not private. We're not supposed to hide it from others. We're not supposed to hide it from the world, right? Jesus says, hey, go and tell, right? Tell people my story. Tell people about who I am. And yet there's probably that discomfort that's there. Seth Godin's an author, blogger. He writes this. He says, discomfort brings engagement and change. Discomfort means you're doing something that others were unlikely to do because they're hiding out in the comfortable zone. Maybe for some of us, it's time to get out of that discomfort that we have. Maybe it's time for us to get out of that comfortable zone and to let that go. Because I think what we have actually done is made that up in our own minds so that we don't feel like we actually have to go and share the good news with others. Now, you might be asking, oh, why am I saying that? Well, I'm saying that because statistics show that that is the case for us. Let me share some of these with you. This is from multiple groups of researchers, Gallup, Barna, Lifeway. Here's some of the research. 81% of U.S. adults say they believe in God. 74% of U.S. adults want to grow spiritually. 44% of U.S. adults are more open to God now than they were pre-pandemic, okay? So that's a good starting point. Let's keep going. 66% of religiously unaffiliated people are open to discussing their Christian faith with a friend, and 65% of religiously unaffiliated people are open to talking with a friend about having a relationship with God. Think about that. Almost 7 out of every 10 people who aren't religiously affiliated are open to conversations about God or even connecting and having a relationship with God. But yet, look at this last statistic. 60% say their friends who claim to be Christians rarely talk about their faith. Our faith is meant to be personal, but it's not meant to be private. If we follow Jesus, our desire should be that others encounter Jesus just like we have. And that begins in the relationships that we have with other people. The relationships that we have with our ones at the Pentagon, at the Kingstown Running Club, at the Franconia Moms Play Group, at your favorite Arlington bar, at your job on Capitol Hill, in your neighborhood, with your family members. Like, we know people that are far from Jesus. In fact, last week we talked about statistically here in Fairfax County, of 1.2 million people, over 60% of the people who live in this county, we would say, are far from Jesus. But it's those relationships that we have with people who are far from Jesus that are the starting point to them encountering who Jesus is. Because I want you to think about this. Think about the conversations that you have with people just on a day-to-day basis that you encounter in all these different areas of life. What do you talk about? You probably talk about broken relationships, struggles that they're having with family or the dating world or with people that they are friends with. You probably have conversations about tensions within marriages. Maybe you talk about the world and how it feels like it's falling apart. You talk about messy finances and the loss of a loved one or a diagnosis that comes back and it's just bringing fear to this individual. And if we're a 99, right, if we're a follower of Jesus, what are we called to do? Are we called to jump in and like, hey, let me make your life feel worse? No. Kind of goes back to Luke 15, where this lost sheep is found. The shepherd grabs the sheep and carries it home. Like, we're called to carry the burden of people in our lives. We're called to walk down that path with them when life is going differently than maybe they had hoped it would go. We're called to help them encounter Jesus, just like many of us have encountered Jesus in our life. It's all about those relationships that we have. That's why I love this 2-day period in the life of Jesus. He's picking his disciples, and as he's picking his disciples, there's just these incredible interactions that happen that we read about in John chapter 1. John chapter 1, starting with verse 35, it says this. It says, the following day, John was again standing with 2 of his disciples. As Jesus walked by, John looked at him and declared, look, there's the Lamb of God. When John's 2 disciples heard this, they followed Jesus. Jesus looked around and saw them following. What do you want? He asked them. They replied, Rabbi, which means teacher, where are you staying? Jesus says, come and see. So here we have John the Baptist, right? John the Baptist is actually Jesus' cousin. And one day he's out doing what John the Baptist is doing. He's trying to prepare the way for Jesus. He's trying to let people know, the Israelites know, hey, this Messiah is coming. Well, the Messiah comes by. It's Jesus. And he's like, hey, there's the guy, right? This is the guy I've been telling you about. This is the guy that you are called to follow. But what do we see here? 2 of John's disciples who have been following John have this encounter with Jesus, and they end up following him. But do you notice what Jesus doesn't do here? If you look at this passage, Jesus doesn't give an exposition on the Bible to him, does he? He doesn't tell him his views on predestination. He doesn't tell him his views on the end times. He doesn't tell him his views on life on Mars. He doesn't do any of that, does he? What does he say? He says, come and see. He doesn't ask them questions either. He doesn't say, hey, are you actually good enough to follow me? He doesn't ask him, did you party too much this past weekend? Do you sleep around? He doesn't ask that. He doesn't even say, hey, tell me your views on predestination, end times, and life on Mars. He doesn't ask that either. What does he say? He says those three words. He says, come and see. What do? Look at verse 40. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, was one of these men who heard what John said and then followed Jesus. Andrew went to find his brother Simon and told him, we have found the Messiah, which means Christ. Then Andrew brought Simon to meet Jesus. Looking intently at Simon, Jesus said, your name is Simon, son of John, but you will be called Cephas, which means Peter. So one of these disciples that encountered Jesus on that day with John is Andrew, okay? He encounters Jesus. And when Jesus says, follow me, come and see, Andrew goes and follows Jesus. And then what does he do next? He goes to someone that he has a relationship with, right? Who happens to be his brother, Cephas, who we know Simon, who has changed his name to Peter, so we know him more commonly as Peter. He goes to Peter and he tells Peter, hey, look, Peter, we found the Messiah. We found the one. We found Jesus. Hey, why don't you come and see who he is? What's Peter do here? Well, Peter encounters Jesus, and we know that Peter follows Jesus and becomes a part of Jesus' disciples. Verse 43. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, come, follow me. Philip was from Bethsaida, Andrew and Peter's hometown. So again, here we have Jesus. He's picking his starting lineup, right? He's picking up his 12, his disciples that he's calling to follow him for the next few years. Jesus goes and finds Philip, which I think is kind of this neat piece to this story. He says, follow me, right? He says, come and see. Philip encounters Jesus, and what does Philip do? Philip ends up following Jesus. Well, what does Philip do once he encounters Jesus? Verse 45. Philip went to look for Nathanael and told him, we have found the very person Moses and the prophets wrote about. His name is Jesus, the son of Joseph from Nazareth. Here's Philip, has an encounter with Jesus. He goes and finds Nathanael. Now, we don't know a whole lot here about Nathanael, other than we have to assume there's this close relationship for Philip to have to go to find Nathanael to tell him this news, right? Look at what he says here. He tells him, we found him. We found the Messiah. We found the one. We found the one that the prophecies had talked about for so many years, the prophecies that we've known since the time we were little kids. Philip goes and finds Nathanael because Philip has encountered Jesus. And he goes to Nathanael and he's like, hey, you need to come and see. Verse 46. Look at Nathanael's response. Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth? This is kind of one of my favorite responses that you find in Scripture, because I sense a lot of sarcasm in what Nathanael is saying here. Can anything good come from Nazareth? There's a few potential options of why he answers this way. Nazareth at that time was just kind of a little nothing village. There was no prophecy that was talking about the Messiah being in Nazareth. It's also potentially thought that where Nathanael's from is actually a small village too, not too far from Nazareth, and they kind of have these village rivalries, if you will. And so this is kind of Nathanael talking some smack right here about Nazareth. It could also be Nathanael has some doubts about the Messiah. And he's been questioning his spirituality in some way. Maybe Nathanael's response is because he really is like one of the ones that we're called to reach in our own life. Verse 46, the rest of 46. Here's Philip's response back to Nathanael. He says, come and see for yourself. Kind of think about everything we've just read here. Jesus knows John, who knows Andrew. Jesus tells Andrew, come and see. Andrew follows Jesus. Andrew finds his brother Peter, says, come and see. Peter does. Jesus finds Philip, says, come and see. Philip does. Philip finds Nathanael, come and see. Nathanael does. Why would this group of people who honestly are just having this first interaction with Jesus, why would they follow him? Why would they want to come and see? I mean, they have just met him. Maybe they've heard stories. Maybe they know a little bit about him. We're not totally sure here. But think about this. Jesus hasn't died and been resurrected by God at this point in time. Like, what is it that made them want to come and see what Jesus was all about? Well, it's all about those relationships, right? Here are people that had encountered Jesus in some way, shape, or form, and were following Jesus and said, hey, come and see. And they decided they wanted to come and see. They dropped everything. And they end up following Jesus because of the relationships that they have. And so for us, and we talked a lot about this last week, it's about the relationships we have with people who are far from Jesus. It's about being able to say, hey, here's the deal. I've encountered Jesus, and I want you to encounter Jesus too. And in these relationships that we have with our ones, man, if we're loving Jesus and following Jesus, guess what? They're encountering Jesus through us. But here's the deal. You don't do this alone. We do this together. Remember, our vision statement says a movement of people on mission together. Like, we are on this mission together. It begins with the personal relationships we have with our one, but then it's us saying to the church, hey, tag, you're it, right? Now it's time for us to do this together. That's why we want this church, this place, to be a comfortable place for you to invite your one to. So they can encounter Jesus, and so they can experience community here just like you do. Now, I will say this, your one probably has preconceived notions about the church. Now, maybe it's because of past church experiences they've had. Maybe it's because of social media. Maybe it's because some TV show or movie. But they have preconceived notions about the church and maybe even about God. But the beauty of this is if you've got that relationship with someone and you're saying, hey, come and see, you know you've got other people there behind you, the church. Your one may say to you, it's just another irrelevant church. And you know what you get to say? Come and see. Your one may say, hey, I'm sure it's just a church who cares only for itself. You know what? Why don't you come and see? Maybe your one would say, hey, if they really knew who I was, they wouldn't want me around. I think you probably need to come and see. Well, I don't know what think about Jesus. Hey, why don't you come and see? I don't know if I can believe in this loving God because everything I see happening in the world around me. Hey, why don't you come and see? We work really hard as a church to be a welcoming place and to have a welcoming environment, from the parking lot, which, by the way, thank you, Don Davis, for doing all the work you did to open up spaces for us to park our cars and get stuck in here a little bit. But thank you for doing that. If you see Don, you know Don, say thank you to him. But we want your ones to drive in here and be like, hey, they expect me to be here. We want this to be a welcoming place in this auditorium and the music that we do and the messages that we give, to the kids' classes that take place, our middle school class that happens during this service, to when you come in and you get the coffee, you're not expecting like church coffee. You're going to get good coffee. I mean, those are the things that we think about. We want, when your one shows up in this space, that you don't sit back and think to yourself, I hope the band's ready for today. I hope the pastor spent some time on the message and it doesn't stink. I hope the coffee is good. Because when you invite your one here, we know that they're already encountering Jesus through you. And we want them to experience and encounter Jesus through all of us here. Because at the moment you invite your one here and they show up, you're saying to us, tag, you're it. I want you to help them encounter Jesus even more. I've invited them to come and see who Jesus really is, and I want them to experience that through you and me. Here's the deal. I believe with all my heart and soul that Jesus is worth encountering. Um, he's the reason for some of us that our marriages are still together. He's the reason for others of us that we were able to make it through a messy divorce. He's the reason for some of us that we keep moving forward even when our child wants nothing to do with us. He's the reason we find joy even when our medical diagnosis doesn't change. He's the reason we have peace when the world seems to be peaceless. He's the reason we wake up each day even when life might seem worthless. He's the reason we're thankful for his grace because of the person we once were. He's the reason why many of us have hope when life may feel hopeless. See, I believe Jesus is worth coming and seeing, and not just encountering him in our individual lives, but encountering him in this place. So many of us have encountered Jesus and we've been changed by it. And our mission is to help others be changed by encountering Jesus too. Like, that's the Jesus I want my ones to encounter. That's the Jesus I want my ones to experience. That's the good news that we are called to share with the world we live in. And again, it begins with our one. And yet our role as the church is to help your one encounter Jesus and experience incredible community in a place like this. How do we do this? Let me walk through a couple of next steps here. First is we build relationships with people who don't know Jesus. And I know you're like, well, hold on, man. We've been talking about that last week. You're talking about that again this week. We get it. I mean, just be intentional about building relationships with people who haven't encountered Jesus. Again, not because you're trying to sell them something, okay? Not because you got some scheme that you're trying to get them a part of. It's because this is who we are called to be if we are followers of Christ. This is the mission that Jesus has put us on. I want you to think about the conversations you have on a normal week with people in your life, right? Think about it. The conversations maybe you have at a fire pit, conversations you have at the bus stop, conversations maybe you have on the bus, conversations that you have where you work, conversations in your neighborhood cookouts. Again, what are you talking about? You're talking about marriage. Maybe you're talking about dating. You're talking about a divorce. You're probably talking about football playoffs and whether the Commanders are going to win tonight, right? You're talking about family. You're talking about kids. You're talking about your favorite bourbon. You're talking about mental health. You're talking about politics. You're talking about spirituality. Like, this is what we do. In our day-to-day, we're having conversations with people over and over again. And many times the people we're talking to and we're spending time with, they are our one. And if we follow Jesus, we are called to help them encounter Jesus through the life that we are living. And so in those conversations that we're having, as people are going through these tough times in life, as they're talking about the struggles of life, we are there to help them navigate through it because we're like, man, I love Jesus. I follow Jesus. So I want to make sure that I'm helping this person understand the power Jesus has had in my life. I'm helping them navigate the tough times and tough experiences in their life. I'm helping to carry the burdens that they carry all the time. And so this really begins with us making sure we're building relationships with people who don't know Jesus. But here's the second thing I would say. We invite people to come and see. Again, we're not doing this alone. We do this together. We this week in our weekly email, we sent out a survey that we're asking you to fill out. If you don't get our weekly email, you can get that through the connection card, or you can let us know, or better yet, on our Church Center app. The second button on there says All Church Survey. We've done a couple of these over the years since I've been here, and we haven't done one in a while. Just want to kind of get an idea of who we are as a church, right? And we got a small sample size so far. A few people have said, hey, I filled this out. So don't do it now. I want you to listen to me the rest of the time. You can do it at the end, okay? But make sure you fill out this survey because it really helps us, especially as we're looking into the future as a church. Let me share some of these statistics, again, from a very small sample size so far. 50% of you say you've been here less than 3 years, which We know that to be true. 20% say that you saw the road sign outside and that's why you showed up. The best, cheapest marketing this church has ever done, right? That sign has cost us nothing, and we see so many show up from that. 22% said you were invited to check out the journey, okay? 58% of you so far have said you invited someone to the journey in 2024, and 64% of you said the person you said, hey, come and see, actually came and showed up. Now, granted, we don't know at this point whether those people are just family friends, people who moved to the area, people who are just looking for another church, whatever it may be. Some of them may have been your one. So we haven't defined that part yet, and as we go through this year, we're hoping to be a little bit better at that. But here's what this tells me. If almost 7 out of 10 people, or 6 out of 10 people said they invited someone this past year, and about 64% came, we have this DNA of inviting people to be here in this place, right? So we're good at inviting others. There's this culture that is there. But too often we overthink inviting our one to church. Listen, do you hesitate to invite somebody to the gym you go to if you think it's great? What about your hairdresser or barber? Which I can't help you there if you need something there, okay? Can't do that. You tell people about that, right? You don't hesitate to tell people about your favorite restaurants, but when it comes to the church, we can clam up like a middle school boy at the school dance where the pretty girl's looking at him and he's afraid to go invite her to go dance with him, right? We get all sweaty, we get all tense, like I just can't do it. But if we follow Jesus, we have the greatest news in the world to share. And it's way better than the gym you go to. It's way better than your hairdresser, way better than your barber. It's way better than your favorite restaurant. It's way better than the middle school dance. It's way better than any gender reveal. But no, you don't do this alone. That you're inviting people to come and be a part of something here together. But a big part of that is through the relationships we have and then saying, come and see. Hey, I want you to encounter Jesus even more fully beyond just the relationship we have. And so this leads us to the last thing, but this only works when we serve together to help people encounter Jesus. I know it's going to sound a little weird, but every week we come together in this place on a Sunday specifically, and we try to share the good news of Jesus in some way. Now, it takes our whole staff and it takes a lot of volunteers to make that take place. But here's what we got to understand. People aren't just encountering Jesus because of the music. People aren't just encountering Jesus because of a person standing up here speaking. A person encounters Jesus through everything they experience in this place. And so when you serve in any capacity, you are helping people experience Jesus and encountering Jesus. Here at the Journey, every single Sunday, it takes about 130 volunteers to make Sunday happen. From parking to the middle school class, to worship, to ushers, to security, to coffee, to kids, to tech. And I know some of you right now are like, oh, here we go. He's doing the old switcheroo, right? He talked about the one and people following Jesus. He talked about the church. He talked about we're in this together. Now he's getting ready to say, hey, now I need you to jump in and volunteer, right? You're getting us ready for that. I don't want to be that guy. And I definitely don't want to be that church, but maybe you see serving and volunteering in that way. Maybe you think, hey, I'm just filling an empty slot on a Excel spreadsheet. I'm just babysitting kids for an hour and making sure nobody runs away. I'm making sure nobody gets run over in the parking lot. I'm just making sure people have coffee because they were too lazy to make it before they got here on Sunday morning. Right? Now, maybe there's minutiae of truth in some of those. My fear is that's the image we've painted about serving. So as 2025 begins, I want us to think about serving this way, that every single week, there's somebody at this church who has invited their one to come and walk into this place. They've said, hey, come and see and encounter Jesus. And guess what? Their one is nervous. They're afraid. Maybe they haven't been to church in a long time or ever, and they're going to walk through those doors because they've had this relationship with you, and you've invited them to come and see. They don't know what to expect. They don't know what they're getting ready to get into, and you're nervous because you've invited them, right? And you want everything to be great and wonderful and volunteers to be ready to go and excited. But if we look at it as just I'm just filling a slot, just helping make a little coffee, just running tech, then I think we're missing the point of what we are doing here in this place. Because when you serve, you are helping people encounter Jesus. If you are making coffee for us on a Sunday morning, you are helping people encounter Jesus. I know you're like, well, that's kind of weird. I'm just giving them coffee. No, many times you're giving them something to hold on to that kind of breaks down some of the barriers. You're giving them some caffeine to get them a little popped up, right? And it's good coffee. It's not Maxwell House. It's good coffee. So you're giving them good coffee, like, oh, this is not what I expected. But you're helping them encounter Jesus. If you're on the tech team, you're helping someone encounter Jesus. If you're facilitating a class for Journey Kids, you're helping the adults, the parents, encounter Jesus in here. Oh, by the way, more importantly, you're helping a kid encounter Jesus. If you're in the parking lot, you're making sure people don't encounter Jesus too soon, by the way, right? I probably should switch those two around. I'm not sure. Hey, we're not about filling holes here. We're about helping people encounter Jesus. Because you and I have been there before. And maybe we were one, and now because of that relationship we've had with someone, and them saying, come and see, we showed up in a place like this, and we've encountered Jesus. And it's not our job to hold on to that. It's our job to share that good news with the world. And we do that together in this place. So yes, I'm going to invite you to jump in and to serve. Our staff works so sneaking hard. And I know some people are like, you're just working towards Sunday. I mean, that's a big part of what we do. But man, we are doing so much during the week to make sure ministries are running and we're staying on course and on vision and interacting and helping people with personal stuff. I mean, we are doing everything we humanly can. And so many of our leaders and coaches and many of you are volunteers, man, you are given every single week up to be here or to serve or to be a part of a life group and serving a life, whatever it may be. But as we head into this new year, we're inviting you to jump in, okay? And I'm just going to be honest, brutally honest with you. Journey Kids needs help. As a parent, sometimes you may come up here and like, man, I got my kid because they had to close the class. It's not because they didn't plan. It's because volunteers, we need more people to make sure that we can run those classes. We want this to be a safe environment. We want these kids to encounter Jesus, and so we're inviting you to be a part of that. But there's so many other areas that you can serve here. And some of you are like, well, you're just talking about Sunday mornings. I'm going to talk about the rest of what we do here over these next couple of weeks. But I'm going to invite you, if you're not jumped in, if you're not serving in some way, but you're a follower of Christ, you're not helping people encounter Jesus. And we need more and more people to help people encounter Jesus. We are in this mission together in this place for however long God has us here. And so we're inviting you to be a part of that. If you go to our Journey Church app or even the QR code in front of you, you're going to find that there's a link there to jump in better together, to be a part of what we are doing here. So we invite you to do this. We've got this incredible good news to share. And you get to share it with your ones in your life. And then you get to say, hey, church, tag you're at. So we can help them encounter Jesus and experience community in this place here.